Welcome to the Bigfoot Society. In this episode, we're releasing 4 classic interviews from the archives, New Hampshire, Oregon, and Montana. If you've experienced something similar or have more information regarding Bigfoot or other cryptids in the same areas, please reach out immediately to me after this episode. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, please contact me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com, and also make sure you check out patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society, where you can become a supporting member and get extra episodes weekly. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got Jeff calling in, and he is calling in to talk to us about some things that he has experienced. How's it going, Jeff?
Great. Thanks for having me.
I'll let you go ahead, and I might ask you some questions along the way, but I'll let you go ahead and start where you'd like to, Jeff.
I'm a 49-year-old, pretty average guy. I live in central New Hampshire. I've been with my partner for 20 plus years. We have two children together. I'm a carpenter, builder in the area. I ski, snowboard, bike, skateboard. I'm an avid solo hiker. Strictly solo. I love history, anything Civil War, World War II, Vietnam, anything like that. Big buff. Love archaeology. Cryptozoology, of course. Anything weird, paranormal, ghosts. Just love it all. I've fallen down the rabbit hole, pretty much of all of it. And I grew up in southwestern New Hampshire, in a small town called Marlborough, which a bit of a hot spot, come to find out over the years. But recently there has been a documentary that came out about the area, which has sparked my interest even more, of course. But it started when for me, the whole Bigfoot interest started when I was about 4 years old, when my family went and saw the movie Legend of Bigfoot at the drive in Keene, New Hampshire. And that really started it for me. I was taken back by it all. It really scared me. It was stuck with me through the years. And it was so vivid. It just took a huge interest in it. And it wasn't about a year later after I saw that movie, and I was a 5-year-old, I was out wandering in the woods, out past our local cemetery. And I was 5 years old, not supposed to be wandering around the woods by myself, of course. Found myself way out farther than I should have been. But I knew those woods and really wasn't scared. Made it out about a quarter mile past the cemetery and felt so comfortable that I found this brook that I decided to take my shoes and socks off and soak my feet in the brook. Felt so comfortable out there. That's how I thought nothing of it. It wasn't like maybe 30 seconds later after I got my feet into the water, I was just overwhelmed with a feeling of dread and that I was going to die. It was just absolute fear. Huge. Now that I look back now, it was like a huge anxiety attack. But whether it was me feeling that maybe I was a little lost out in the woods, but I wasn't, because I knew exactly where I was. This was something that stuck with me through the years. I threw my shoes and socks on as quick as I could. I didn't run. I walked out of there. I'd take two, three steps, look back. 2-3 steps, look back the whole way, all the way till I got to the cemetery. And that's when I hit the cemetery, I felt I got in an open area. I got out of the woods. That's when I felt a little bit more comfortable, and the fear started going away. But it really stuck with me through the years that I felt driven out of the woods. I saw nothing, smelt nothing, but this overwhelming fear that hit me, I've never experienced it since. I really haven't. It's something that stuck with me through the years. And it being in Marlborough, through the years, I've researched through the internet and stuff and come across that old accounts from Marlborough, of the Marlborough Monkey, and from John Horgan, actually, which I just listened to your podcast with him. It was great. And which I reached out to him a few years ago, and he was gracious enough to share with me all of his files and stuff on that. It was excellent. Loved it. Can't thank him enough. But I could not shake that from me. It really stuck with me through the years, and it will not ever leave me. It was something that was like the worst anxiety attack I've ever had. And I'm someone who suffers from anxiety and depression. And this is something that it will never forget, ever. I ran home as soon as I got out of the cemetery. I ran and got to my house, and I told nobody. I told nobody what I did out there because I was out in the woods. And I shouldn't have been out there, and they would ever let me back out there again,
That's such a fascinating story. Did you know anyone that had a sighting of the Marlborough Monkey? I'm just curious about that.
Well, come to find out after years, talked to my brother about it, and he's he knew of a couple of people in that same, not far from where I was, and he himself was growled at out hiking out there with his girlfriend.
Really?
He said it was like the deepest growl. It was like an earthquake. And so that's why he shrugged it off, because he didn't want to panic his girlfriend at the time. And he just said, she was like, what was that? And he was like, oh, it's just like an earthquake or something. And like, he knew it was no earthquake. And he said it was the loudest, deepest growl you could imagine. It was not a mile from where I was.
Oh, wow. Have you ever gone back to that same spot again as an adult?
I was just out there last year. I took my family up to the cemetery because I grew up next to the cemetery. I drive by that house now and again to the house I grew up and go out to the cemetery. And I happened to just walk out I walked out to the woods a little ways, and I wanted to keep going, but I didn't have the time. But sure, I wanted to go out there and go to that brook again, because that brook goes to, we'd gone out there before. That brook goes up to a old spring house that is a collapsed spring house. It's all dilapidated, and it's all into the brook itself. That was probably where I was going at the time, but I hadn't quite made it. I made it to the brook, and I was like, oh, I'll just soak my feet. And that was like the feeling of dread. That's what stuck with me. Dread. I'm going to die, like right then and there. And that's when I threw my shoes and socks on, and I just had the sense enough as a kid. I don't know how, but I was don't run. Because I knew it was bear country. New Hampshire's bear country.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You can't go nowhere. You can't go nowhere without seeing a bear. So I was I knew not to run for some reason. I was smart enough. I didn't run. But I would take 2-3 steps and look behind me. 2-3 steps, look behind me. It wasn't until after I started researching in 2003, 2004 that I made the connection of I could have been zapped. Something could have scared me out of there without me knowing it.
Wow. Have you ever reached out to you're talking about the Marlborough Monkey documentary, correct?
Correct.
Have you ever reached out to Carrick St. Laurent as well?
I actually met him.
Okay, cool.
A couple of years ago. Good. And I just didn't he didn't ask me, so I didn't, it was a quick meeting, but no, I think he was probably in the midst of making it right then. I think he said. Yeah,
it would have been about that time, I think. But oh man, that's so interesting. Yeah, John Horgan was such a cool guy to talk to. He's the nicest guy. I could have talked to him for another few hours about his UFO investigations he did. We barely got into that. That guy has been to every major UFO hotspot the last 30 years.
We have everything in common as far as that stuff's concerned, though.
Yeah.
Even hockey.
Right, yeah, the Bruins.
UFOs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it all. The account he speaks of, his report of his account of the Marlborough Monkey is in the Marlborough Quarry. And I've been there several times just because I heard that report. And I've been there just for fun to go in there before I even knew that, too.
Sure.
Neat place.
Did you notice anything out of the ordinary when you were in there?
No, it's just old. It's an old stone quarry.
Yeah, growing up in Northfield, I wasn't into Bigfoot and stuff as a kid or a teenager. enough to go looking and things like that. And so I find out now that it was close to a relatively big hotspot with the Marlborough Monkey. It just blew me away when I first found that out from Carrick, but it's very cool for you guys.
It's pretty neat. Once you get digging, there is some reports in the area in Marlborough, but they're like Class B, I believe, stuff like that.
If you ever hear
sounds
of any Bigfoot stuff from like the Northfield, Mass, Winchester, New Hampshire area, that area, I'd be really interested. If it ever comes across your plate, just to hit me up.
Not that area.
Yeah, I've never seen any.
I've seen a footprint in Columbia, New Hampshire.
Oh, cool.
Out by Holbrook.
Yep, I know about Holbrook's wild, dude. I've been up there a lot as a younger kid. It's quite the area.
Yeah, that was probably 2004-ish. I was out. Me and a friend were fishing in a pond. He let me off to go so I could go answer the call of nature. He dished me off it's a snowmobile trail that comes off of the lake right there, the pond. And so I walked up the trail a little ways, and then in where the snowmobile tracks were dug into the mud, there was a clear, definite footprint mashed right into the ski track. Yeah, I put all my fingers in the footprint, and so it was smashed into the mud. So if this was a bear footprint, the claws most certainly would have shown. There was just no way it could not have. It was like 6 inches down in the rut of the ski track.
Wow.
And I'd put all my fingers in the foot track, and it was a good 6 feet plus wide.
Crazy.
It's huge. And my buddy would not get out of the canoe to come look at it.
No, that's all you.
You got to come look at this. He's like, nope. I'm staying right here. Like,
that's funny, man.
There's no way there's somebody out here walking barefoot. It was a rainy, cold weekend.
Wow.
There's no way.
That's crazy.
And there's no way it was a bear track. There was just no way. All winter, I've been seeing really crazy orbs. And that's the latest thing that I've been going through.
Okay.
I cannot explain. Pretty wild.
In Marlborough area or Keene or?
No, in central New Hampshire where I live.
Oh, wow.
In Marlborough.
Crazy. Down close to you?
I don't know what to make of that. Most of them have been what I call like high flyers. They look almost like a satellite, but they're not. They probably would guess like maybe in the 5,000 to 10,000 foot range.
Interesting.
The rainbow orbs is what I call them.
Really?
They just flash every color of the rainbow. And I've seen probably 15 to 20 of them, like all winter. And I just don't know what to make of it. I just taking my dog for a walk out in the morning and at night, and I see them.
I've heard of a lot of right now, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on up in the skies, but I have heard of one of my friends got a report from the Swansea area that there was a sighting of something flying over. This was last week or the week before when all that stuff was going on.
Was it the Starlinks? Because I happened to see that go over. I got the video of it and everything.
Jeff, supposedly per the witness, and this is on TikTok, so it's out in public. My friend Bethany took the report, but supposedly someone was driving through Swansea and they saw a large object fly over and 2 jets fly after it. And then they shot it down and they saw it fall behind a mountain in a ball of fire. And a bunch of other cars saw it too, because they almost went off the road. Now, keep in mind, this is like just a witness report on TikTok, so that might not be very reputable, but it's very interesting. It's interesting.
Been happening a lot.
I know.
That's been happening a lot, I think. Yeah.
If you hear anything like that,
that's neat.
Let me know. Definitely anything that can, back that up. But the thing is that she hasn't gotten any more info, I believe, that verifies that from any other sources. But it's an interesting story that randomly happened in Swansea, New Hampshire, right?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I love hearing the extra accounts like that, because I just moved. I live in what I call the Ossaby Triangle.
Oh, yeah.
There's been all sorts of random odd stuff here. From Bigfoot to UFOs, the orbs that I see, you name it. It's all been seen here. And I just moved right to the base of the mountains right here, just over the winter. So I'm like at the base of the Osprey Mountains right now.
Oh, wow.
So hopefully since I've moved, I've seen one of the orbs. But before I moved, that's when I saw the majority of them over by a lake I lived near. But when I travel, I used to commute up the road up along the Osprey Mountains here and up on Route 25. And that's where I've seen several red orbs right on the roadside.
Wow. Cars
driving by, everything. Nobody cared, not a care in the world, it seems. Am I the only one seeing these? So just recently, I took my daughter shopping. On the way back, I was like, going to tell her, I was like, remember I've told you I saw some weird lights in this area? And like before I could say that, I look up and there's 3 orbs. I'm not kidding. Sitting on top of the telephone pole.
Really?
The cross member of the telephone pole.
Yeah.
Right next to each insulator of the on the wire.
Wow.
A red orb sitting, like, I thought they were Christmas lights at first. Because it was just before Christmas. It was just a couple days before Christmas.
Oh, wow.
And then I was like driving by and looking up at them, like, and I see them moving. And like, those are not Christmas lights. I'm like I had my daughter with me. I'm like, I'm not stopping. I cannot stop.
That's wild.
I don't want her to see this. I don't want her to see this.
That's hard on a little kid. Yeah.
It was high strangeness. High strangeness, without a doubt. Man. And it was like right around dusk. Cars driving by. Nobody stopping or nothing. Like, So that area in particular, I've seen those 3. They're sitting on the telephone pole. And then I saw one directly across the street that was just scattering around up in the treetops, like the trees weren't there one morning. Bright red, orange, softball size orb. Oof. It was like the trees weren't even there for it. Like it was incredible. That was like a 15 to a 20-second sighting of that. Didn't know what to make of it. I still don't. All of them. I don't know what to make of all of them. I've seen so many now that I feel like I'm getting picked on.
Yeah, they know who to come after. You're my guy for high strangeness in southern New Hampshire, no doubt. Man, you're really seeing some crazy stuff out there, Jeff.
I don't know if it's because I've opened myself up. Sure. I've fallen down the rabbit holes. I've really took an interest in so many things. I don't know if I've heard of that many times on many podcasts. People that take interest seem to experience more. You know?
It's true. I think that they start looking for certain things, and you got to be careful what you start looking at, because we'll leave it there. But Jeff, it's been a fun chat with you. I appreciate you calling up and letting me know about your experiences. And if you happen to have anything else weird happen, please get in touch, and might do a follow-up in the future. At least keep in touch through Facebook. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Jeff.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to a new friend today. This is George from Oregon, and he's got a few interesting encounters to share with us about Bigfoot back in the 1980s, I believe. But George, how's it going today?
Oh, it's going pretty good. Real fine. I was born in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and our family, we are a 4th generation McNair family in Oregon, and all of us spend a lot of time hunting and fishing and doing that sort of stuff. And I went to Medford High School, graduated in 1965. And what else here? Okay. And I'm a landscape architect that lives in Coos Bay, Oregon. So let's start out. I'm just going to estimate the date. Back in about 1980, my friend Bill and I, but he and I were wood cutting. We lived in Medford, Oregon at the time. And I had a big wood truck, and we drove north of Medford up towards a small logging town called Prospect, Oregon. And like I said, the town was small. And we were cutting wood, I'd say 5 miles from Prospect, Oregon. And we were in a flat area where real tall Douglas fir trees were growing all over the place. And these trees get 100 feet tall by 6 feet wide. And there was huckleberry bushes scattered about. It was flat ground. And we decided to just camp out on we just threw down a big tarp and laid our sleeping bags out. And because we were so tired after cutting wood all day, we just had to get to sleep. The moon was out that night, and so you could see across through the forest. You could see the bushes and stuff. And anyway, this is a mystery I still am not figuring out. At 2 a.m, I'm sound asleep, and whatever happened, I don't know, but I snapped awake, and I looked, propped up in my sleeping bag, and looked ahead about 50 feet. And so I'm looking, trying to clear my eyes, and there was in front, 50 feet away, there was a big fallen tree that was about 4 feet. And behind this tree was a fuzzy animal. All I could see, it was behind the tree with its arms on the tree. So all I could see was from the waist up. And so I'm looking directly into its eyes. I'm not afraid, probably foolishly. And I'm looking, I'm thinking, gee, that's a bear, what I thought. And then I was thinking, gee, bears have big, fuzzy, round ears. This thing had no visible ears. And then I knew, because I'd seen bears before in the wild. One came down a hillside while I was fishing and was going to chase after me and get my fish. So I knew what bears look like. And this thing did not have a flat head like a bear. It had a cone-shaped head. Now, it looked to me, at the time, I didn't think Bigfoot. I just looked at it, and I would guess it was about maybe 300, 350 pounds. So in the Bigfoot world, that's a small one. So we just kept staring. And anyway, I thought I'll wake my partner Bill up. So I looked over, pushed on him. He wouldn't wake up. I looked back, and of course, the Bigfoot was gone. Now, I didn't hear brush crackling, so it must have snuck off pretty well. So this is something to remember. When you see a Bigfoot, the minute you take your eyes off, they're going to disappear.
So you mentioned this was in an area with a lot of huckleberry plants, correct?
Yeah.
Did you notice anything around the area where it looked like there were large flattened areas that something big could have laid down in at all?
It could have easily laid behind the huckleberry bushes. I'm pretty sure they were huckleberry. They were about 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide and thick. It laid behind them. You mean in terms of how it escaped?
Just curious, there's some places out there that are, when you see certain plants, sometimes people have found like nest sites. And I was just curious if you remembered anything like that in that certain area.
Good question. I didn't search the area.
Okay.
Yeah, we could have camped right next to a nest site. I think back on it. It took me about 2 weeks to realize what that was. Because about that time, the Patterson-Gimlin film was showing a lot. And so I suddenly realized it. Anyway, I look back on it and have a theory. I'll just make it quick. I think Bigfoots are closer to humans, and they're very intelligent in terms of woods savvy and protecting stuff. I think they're smart enough to know. Now, if this Bigfoot was really not friendly and wanted to take me out for dinner, I think they know that if 2 people are involved, second person will be a witness. And the Bigfoots are smart enough to know that you don't leave a witness because the woods are gonna have search parties, the state police, helicopters. So anyway, that's a theory I have. And that's the reason why I'm here now, because I have a partner. Because there are 411 cases where people just disappear, and we don't know why. Okay, let's go to so quite a few years passed, and anyway, there was a second mystery encounter. As the years passed, I started reading more and got real interested. And by the way, Tom Powell's book about Bigfoots, he's the author. I read that one, and it's really good. And in that book, he talked a little about Bigfoots that apparently they call it cloaking. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into paranormal stuff and have all the audiences just joking and laughing. But the second time, we had moved to Coos Bay, Oregon, which is on the Oregon coast. And south Coos Bay, we have what's called the Elk River. And then you drive up the Elk River about 30 miles, and there's a campground. So this is when I started basically researching Bigfoot, see if I could scare myself out to death, which is what happened. So I drove up the Elk River to this deserted campground, and then I was searching around. After a while, it became dark, just pitch dark. And so I'm on the road looking into the camp. And again, it's Oregon country has what are very tall trees. They're called Douglas fir, and this campground was flat, and there were bushes. So I'm looking in there, and I hear this odd bird call. I never heard a bird call like this, especially at night, and it sounded fake to me because I've been, like I said, I'm 75 years old, and I've been in the woods many times. So here this bird call comes, and it sounds like it's about 100 feet from me. I can tell. It was about 100 feet. And I can't describe what it sounded like. It sounded like a cross between maybe a crow and a woodpecker or something. And then I just stood there. And about 3 minutes later, I hear the same bird call, except it's coming from the bush right in front of me. And I couldn't believe it because that was a matter of seconds that it moved from 100 feet away and came in front of this bush. And I'm standing right there looking in the bush. It's real thick. And I thought, oh boy, what happened here? Maybe there was another one in the bush. I don't know. Maybe it threw its voice. I've heard of them being paranormal. So anyway, it's pitch black again. I'm by myself. Didn't bring any guns. And at the time I was a school teacher. I had to get back. I just left it at that. I wasn't going to look in the bush, but it was just something weird. And it was perfect Bigfoot country. And if you look on BFRO, it was in Curry County, you can see the Bigfoot report that people write up. Okay, so that's the second one. And that wasn't too scary. Now, the third one that happened this was near Coquille, Oregon, which is close to Coos Bay, Oregon, about 30 miles apart. And I'm guessing both of these incidences were in 2005 to 2010. Anyway, I'd gotten a little more savvy. And so it looked like an area where Bigfoots were. You have to recognize areas. And so what I did is took some metal wire and hooked about 7 apples and hung them from some trees that were about 8 feet up. And my theory is this lets them know that you're friendly, and most of them. And so maybe they don't want to jump on you at night and take out a friendly human. Who knows? So anyway, so I went back about a week later. Okay, so now I'm near Coquille, which is about 20 miles east of Coos Bay. It has the Coquille River running through it. It's a great place to drift boat and catch steelhead and salmon. Okay, so anyway, these apples had been hung and they were there about a week. So I went back to check. And if I recall, most of the apples were there. I hung around so long, it got pitch black again. And my wife was with me this time. And so we're standing there, and I hear these faint whistles. Like you'd hear a whistle, and then maybe 30 seconds, a minute would go by, and then you'd hear another one. And I knew that Bigfoots do this because I'd read about them. There are good books out there. One of them, anyway, I had known previously, and I thought, gee, sure enough, this is happening. I couldn't believe it. I was looking up into the pitch black forest, and something was whistling. And I said, Chris, my wife, do you hear that? Yeah, I hear that. I said, what do you think it is? And she said, oh, it's just kids up there. Oh, jeez. No, because we were in a dense forest and there was only one house that was several miles from where we were. So she thought they were kids playing out in the pitch black forest at night. I don't think she really wanted to know what that was. So I said, okay, maybe we better just go, because who knows, or maybe one of them's hungry. So I evacuated her out of the area with me. And on the way back to the car, I looked up to where they were, and I saw some object pop up out of one of the bushes, and then it ducked back down. I thought, wow, okay. We just got in the car and we left.
You said an object pop up when you looked back up the hill, correct?
Yeah.
Did you see any details for that object? Anything else that you can use to describe it at all?
It looked strange to me. I could make out maybe a head, shoulders, but they were illuminated, and there was no illuminated light around. So that part I have questions about. But I did see, and it wasn't clear, it was a flash.
Sure.
But so I wish it would have been more clear and better. But anyway, that's what happened at that incident. Now, I've been wanting to get back to that area, and so I'm looking for somebody to go with me. If anybody knows of anyone close to Coos Bay, I would like a couple of partners to go up there and hang some apples and see what we find. And another thing, that same area that I'm talking about, I've been looking at Bigfoot reports, and this one guy, I left his name, and he was camping up in that area, out in the open. And he called me last week and said while he was camping, he heard an enormous roar, like a Bigfoot roar, and scared he and his wife half to death. And another report came out of this area, same area. A man and wife were driving through this area up a mountain, and they some rocks started to be thrown at them across the road. And his wife got out and looked up and heard branches cracking, and she said she saw a Bigfoot. So this area, I know, has a clan of Bigfoots. But of course, what we don't want are hunters in there trying to take a trophy. So anyway, if somebody gets in touch with me, shall I give them my email address?
George, as we talked about before, this is totally up to you. If you want, because there's people that listen to this all over the place, especially in the Pacific Northwest. So if you want people to get in touch with you, maybe you could give them some info about where to look, etc. You can definitely provide a contact right now.
So that's gmcnair800 at gmail.com. So if you want to go researching, I'll take you. But you got to be trustworthy, because I don't want this area to be exposed, because I'm pretty sure there's a clan of Bigfoots. Anybody interested in Bigfoot can join a forum. I've been on the forum for years and years.
Absolutely.
It's just called the Bigfoot Forum. So thank you much for listening.
Thank you, George, for allowing me to ask you some questions and for sharing your encounter stories. And hopefully there's people listening. That area sounds familiar to you. Please get in touch with George so that maybe you guys can work together and find out some more information about Sasquatch in that area. And thank you, George.
Okay. And thank you for having me on. I'll see you on the Bigfoot Forum.
All right, Bigfoot Society. Today I've got the privilege of talking to Leslie, who's an outdoors woman and bow hunter. Thanks for coming on the podcast today, Leslie. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Now, Leslie, you've had a ton of really interesting experiences, and I'd love to get into those right away. So let's get right into it.
Okay, great. Thank you again. I'll share a little bit about myself and how I was raised, which will help the listeners understand how I got to most recent encounters out in Montana. I was born and raised in the Midwest in a suburb of a city outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. And there's a trend in that area to go north for the weekends. People do their work week and then they hop in their vehicles and they head north to lake country where there's woods and water. And I grew up in this way, and I hunted and fished with my dad growing up. And I've always had a love for the woods. And so that puts me out into the wild still today, where I go fishing and hunting and just foraging for wild berries and mushrooms and things. I just really enjoy the outdoors. My first potential encounter occurred in 2000. I was up in the Boundary Water Canoe area, which is in the northern part of the state of Minnesota. And it's the boundary of Minnesota and Canada. And I was on a grouse hunting and fishing trip with my dad and I often found myself surrounded by these guys growing up because they love to hunt and fish too. And that's who I spent my time with mostly. We were up there and it was midday and I wanted to go grouse hunting, and all the guys wanted to hang back at camp. And so I decided that I was going to just walk on foot and go to a trail. And where we were was, if you look at Lake Superior and the west side of Lake Superior in Minnesota, and you go up Lake Superior, you find a town named Hovland, Minnesota. We were northwest of there, about 20 miles. And I left camp on foot with my 12-gauge shotgun, and I was going to go look for grouse. And there was a hiking trail not far from where we camped that headed kind of northeast and away from camp. And so I thought I'll just go walk that trail. And when you're hunting for grouse, if you don't have a dog to help flush birds, you just walk quietly and listen. And so at that time, I had no knowledge of Bigfoot activity. I hadn't really done any looking into Bigfoot behaviors or anything of that nature. It just wasn't anything I ever thought about. So I have my shotgun and I'm walking down this path. And the terrain in this area is, if you've watched the show Port Protection, and that Port Protection gets a lot of rain and the ground is mossy and wet. It seems like it's always wet in Port Protection. That's a lot like how it is up in the Boundary Waters. There's a lot of rain. There's a lot of marshland. It's not mossy like it is in Port Protection, but it's just wet, muddy terrain. You don't really want to go off trail. And so there was a hiking trail that was at least 5 miles long, if not longer. And I thought, well, I'll just hike down this trail real quiet and look and listen for grouse. And so without a dog, you just walk real slow, try not to make any noise. And you might take 20 or 30 steps and then you stop and you listen. And grouse are going to make a real quiet noise that sounds like water droplets. And so you stop and you listen for the grouse to make noise, and you watch for them down on the ground, or you might look up in trees. They might be perched there. But that's what I was doing, as I was just taking a hike by myself, very slow, and watching for grouse. And I was about probably a half mile down this trail, and moderately dense forest around me. And the trail was mostly hard-packed mud. So I wasn't making any noise when I was stepping and walking and stepping over rocks. It's a very rocky terrain up there. And I would stop and listen. So at one point I stopped taking a step and listened, and I heard a step off to the side of me. And I forget, since it was 2000, I forget it was left or right side of me, but I heard a step, a footfall, after I stopped walking. And I thought immediately it's probably a grouse. And so I just turned all my attention in that direction and just listened, and I heard nothing. And I stood there waiting for this grouse to move, and nothing moved. And so I just continued taking a few steps, and I thought, I wonder if that grouse is going to move again. And so then I stopped walking again, and I heard another footfall after I had stopped walking. And so again, I'm staring in this area, and I cannot see what it is that's moving. And I think it's a grouse I can't see. They're pretty well camouflaged, and I figured it was just off far enough where I couldn't see it. So I continued to walk and stop, but then I heard a stick break on one time when I stopped walking. The next step and footfall, a stick broke. And so then I realized I was being flanked by something. And having grown up in the hunting and fishing, I've hunted white-tailed deer, and I've had bear around me, and wolves and coyotes and foxes. And I hadn't been elk hunting yet at that point in time in my life, but I've heard animals walking through the woods, and this was not an animal with 4 legs walking on the ground. It sounded like a footfall, just 1 foot setting down. I didn't know what it was, and I thought maybe it could have been a mountain lion, but then I wondered if I would hear the mountain lion or not. And rather than continue on down the path, I just took my gun off safety, and I held it at the ready. My arms were folded, and my 12 gauge was up, clutching it against my body, so I wouldn't have to bring it up if I had to shoot in some direction. And I turned and I hustled out of there. And I did stop once or twice on my way back down that trail back towards camp. And this creature was still pacing me, and I couldn't see it. I never saw it. So that was that incident. And I never saw the creature, but I went back to camp and I shared with my dad what had happened. And he said it was probably just a big cat following you, which I've never seen up there. It doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm sure they do, mountain lions, but I've never seen one in the wild. So that was the first incident. And I didn't think much of it after that. I put it in the back of my mind and probably hoped I was never paced again out in the wild. But fast forward to last fall, September 2022, I have a cousin. His name is Mike, and Mike lives in Montana, and he moved from Minnesota out to Montana maybe 40 years ago. And he's an avid outdoorsman, probably one of the best big game hunters I'll ever know in my entire life. Just a real smart hunter and really a good man, good family man, has a great family. Having my cousin live out there, I've never gone big game hunting or hunting for elk with him. And I reached out, and a couple years ago started traveling out to Montana to bow hunt elk with him. Last year was my 3rd year traveling out to bow hunt elk with him, and we were in a new location hunting. We were in the Tobacco Root Mountains, and there were 3 encounters there, which I'll talk about. So I'm going to set this up so you understand who was experiencing these encounters. We had my cousin Mike, who's been an avid hunter his whole life. He's hunted every large game animal you could hunt, probably in the US or Canada. He's hunted a lot his whole life. So he's just a pro. So Mike was out there, a relative of his on his wife's side of the family. He was hunting with us, and my son was along as well. So there was 4 of us. And we had been hunting for several days, and the relative of Mike's wife, he had arched an elk. And that elk was in the cooler or in the freezer and cooler for a couple days, and then, or about a day. And he was going to go out and do some scouting, look for fresh elk tracks, because we hadn't been seeing elk that week. They weren't calling, they weren't moving. It was pretty quiet. So he had already got his elk. So he took off by himself one morning to go scout and look for fresh elk tracks in places we hadn't been yet in that area in the Tobacco Root Mountains. So he came back to camp after that scouting morning and said that he found a spot where one logging road ended, and he parked his vehicle or his truck, and he walked up this draw and found 2 wallows. And wallows, for the listeners who aren't familiar with that term, that is a mud hole, essentially, that's created by elk using their antlers. And the elk to roll around in these mud holes to get mud on their hide, on their fur. And they like to do it once or twice a day, typically. And so there's all sorts of fresh elk sign around. So we found 2 wallows, and I'll describe the terrain we were in for this hunt. So he came back from scouting, and he marked the 2 wallows on his Onyx app, GPS style app that we use for hunting. And he shared the coordinates with me, and the decision was made after he had scouted this and found the tracks and found the wallows, that was the best sign that we had seen all week for elk. And so that was probably the best chance, if we were by those wallows, to get a chance to arch an elk. I and my son headed up to this area that evening to go sit. And the plan was to hike up to the wallows and to pick the wallow that looked most active and have my son sit off to, if you were looking uphill, have him sit off to the left side of the wallow, and I would sit off to the right side of the wallow at the same elevation. And with the thermals in the mountains, we expected the breeze to come down the mountain and carry our scent downhill towards where we parked. And so we expected all activity at the wallows. If anything was going to happen with elk, we expected it to come from up high to come down to the wallows that afternoon. So we parked the truck and we hiked up this drainage area, and it's a little bit marshy and mucky, and it's hardwoods and boulders, and you're climbing up this area. And we went uphill up this draw. It took us about an hour and 15 minutes to get up to where these wallows were. And we got settled down. My son was on one side of the wallow. I was on the other. We're about 30 yards away from where the wallow was, but we could see it. And we were just waiting. And we had agreed, my son and I had agreed, we would sit until 7 p.m. and then we would meet back at the wallow and then head back down the draw to where the truck was parked on this dead-end logging road. And so while we were sitting there, my son hasn't really looked into Sasquatch or even talking about it. He wasn't necessarily a believer or a knower or thinking that was a possibility or anything, but we were sitting there, and we had agreed to meet at the wallow, and if anything came up, although neither one of us were expert elk callers, very novice, probably sounded pretty sick making a call. If anything came up, we would call to each other and then meet at the wallow. So we were sitting there. It was very quiet. There was no wind. I could hear nothing moving, no animals, no pine squirrels, nothing. And I heard a tree knock, and that tree knock was uphill from us, a little higher elevation, but it was more over on the left side of the wallow where my son was sitting, but up the draw from him, so further up. And it didn't sound like it was too much further up. And so much like getting the attention of a dog when the dog's ears go up and its head cocks to the side, when that tree knock happened, I immediately, all of my energy focused on that area, and I was just looking and trying to figure out what it was that I heard, because the sound was like taking a Louisville Slugger wooden bat and walking up to a telephone pole and hitting it as hard as you can. just real loud and distinct, one big knock. And I'm trying to think of what that could be, and I'm trying not to let all my Sasquatch interest play a role here. And I thought, wow, that was a pretty loud knock. And I'm just sitting there, and it's still just like super quiet. And I hear a second knock, same exact location. And I thought, that is a tree knock. And I got my cow bleat reed out of my pocket, and I made a cow talk noise, which wasn't great. And my son recognized that it was me calling to him. And he answered my call with his cow talk. And he started he took his arrow out of his bow and put it in his quiver and was getting ready to walk and meet me at the wallow. I looked at my phone at that point, which was in my pocket. I never thought in that moment to take my phone out of my pocket, because when you're out hunting, especially bow hunting, you want to be as still as possible, as little movement as possible, because the animals will pick up on it. And so the last thing you want to do is quickly reach for something if you think an animal is coming. So I didn't get my phone out before this. Had I thought it was going to be a Bigfoot or possibly a Bigfoot, you'd think, why wouldn't you just grab your phone and start recording at least the tree knocks or something? But that was the furthest thing from my mind. It was really fear and shock, I think I was going into in that moment. So I cow talked to him. He cow talked back. He started getting his stuff packed up to move to meet me at the wallow, as did I. And I heard this creature, whatever it was, which was up the draw and maybe a little left of me, more in my son's direction. I heard it take some steps. It was like 3 or 4 steps. If you looked up the draw, up the mountain, it went from left to right, and then it came down the draw on the right-hand side of me. And all I heard was 3 or 4 steps. And I heard it break a twig downhill from me, but off to my right-hand side, when it had started uphill from me on my left-hand side. So 3 or 4 footfalls, it covered 75 yards or more, 100 yards. It covered so much ground in those steps when it snapped a twig. I don't know what could cover that much ground in those few steps, unless I didn't hear the steps in between those and they were shorter, or if there was more than one creature around me. But the directions of the steps were that way, from upper left, and then it went across above me in elevation and then came down to my right-hand side, was heading down the draw in the direction of where my truck was parked. I meet my son at the wallow. He walks up to it. I walk up to it. And he said, "What was that?" And I said, "What did you hear?" And we talked about it. I said, "Let's get off the mountain." And when I had grabbed my phone and looked at it after I cow talked to him, it was 10 minutes to 7. And we had agreed to meet at 7 o'clock at the wallow, but I couldn't wait. I had to get out of there in that moment. And I was worried that these knocks were over by him. And he only had a 9mm he was carrying, and I was carrying a 10. And so I at least wanted to get us together, so we at least had those 2 handguns together versus just his alone, should something happen that was requiring us to pull our guns. I said, "Let's get out of here." It took us an hour and 15 minutes to get up. It took us about 20 minutes to get down. We ran down the draw to get to the truck, so we're moving pretty quick. We went back to camp. My cousin and the relative from his wife's side were there at camp. They didn't go out hunting that afternoon. They were processing the elk that the other person with us harvested the day before. So they were in camp processing. There were no other hunters around. There were no other vehicles around, really out there by ourselves. So we go back to camp, and I share with them what happened and what we heard with the knocking and the walking. And the gentleman with us that had harvested the elk, he said, "Oh, the same thing happened to me this morning." So he experienced exactly, or what I thought was exactly, what my son and I had experienced that morning. But he gave us the coordinates to go back up there that evening to sit for the hunt. And so we went up there not knowing that had happened to him. But I described where this creature walked and its footfalls and how far it got. And he said exactly the same thing in terms of the knocks and where they came from and the walking away. So I thought that was too much of a coincidence to not cause alarm for me. And so sitting around that evening, we decided that the next day, the 4 of us were going to go hunt that area, because that's where the elk tracks were. and we really wanted to harvest another elk. And so that particular area in the Tobacco Root Mountains, the road that I had parked on the night before and walked up, that was a lower logging road. There was a logging road above this area as well. So you could drive the upper logging road and park and then walk down this draw. The next morning, my son and this other gentleman drove on the upper logging road and parked. And the plan was for them to come down the draw. I'm going to say it's east of the Wallows. That's where they came down the draw. And they stopped at the same elevation as the Wallows. And my cousin, Mike, and I parked at the lower area where my son and I parked the night before and went up the draw. And we went up to where the wallow was that my son and I were hunting on at the same elevation the other two guys were at. And together at that time, they were bugling and cow talking back and forth. We were, as two separate groups, to try and get some elk moving in the area to see if we could create some excitement for elk so that we could maybe see one. This other gentleman would bugle or cow talk, and then my cousin, who's an expert caller, he would do the same back or a similar call or answer. We did this for a little while until my cousin and I were standing by the wallow and doing this cow talk and bugling and just having periods of quiet time, 10 minutes of just standing there listening. And then there would be more talking, cow talking or whatever. We were hunting, basically. There was a tree knock in the same spot it happened the night before and the same spot that happened to the other gentleman the morning before. And I just looked at Mike and he said, "Was that a tree knock?" He looked at me and I just shook my head yes, or said yes, or something real quiet because the woods were so quiet. And so he reaches down and he grabs a stick that he finds, and it was thicker than a baseball bat, but he found a stick and he just held one finger up to me like, "Hang on a second." And he whacked that stick on the tree to knock back. And when he did that, his stick broke into many pieces. It was like a rotten branch or something, but it was a knock. And he dropped that piece that was still in his hand, and we stood there, and this thing knocked back. So it responded to his knock. And again, this thing is so close to us, we couldn't see it, but it was like knocking what would be probably, if you're in thick woods, imagine 20 yards away or 30 yards away. That's 20 large steps or 30 large steps away is where this knock came back from. And it just felt like it was just so close to us. And I looked at him and probably used some colorful language and said, "Let's get out of here." And unbeknownst to me, he was angled away from me and he carried his big bear gun on his right hip in his rib cage area. And my gun is a chest holster gun with a leather strap that goes over it to hold it in the holster. And I didn't know this, but he unholstered his gun, and that side of his body was facing away from me. That side of his body was facing the direction of where this tree knocking was coming from. So he unholsters his gun and looks at me, and he makes a motion with his hand for me to unsnap the leather strap that straps my 10 millimeter into its holster on my chest. And so when he told me to do that and get ready, I went ashen or all white or something. It was pretty scary. So I knew a guy who spent his life hunting in the mountains for large game, for him to unholster his gun because he feels a threat, that's pretty serious in my book. And I have a lot of respect for his hunting knowledge and everything. So when he's telling me to get ready, I unsnapped that leather strap and I grabbed on to my gun. I didn't unholster it, but I was ready to if I needed to. So I had my bow in one hand and my other hand up on my handle of my gun. And just as I was unsnapping that leather strap on my holster, whatever this creature was, it let out a sound that I've heard somebody describe in another podcast recently. Actually, Mike called my attention to it, my cousin. But it was a sound of a lot of air leaving, a lot of lung capacity, big lungs, and an exhale with a huff in disgust. So if you can imagine just the most disgusted, loud huff, that if I could assign an emotion to it, I would say disgust. And it was probably about the same time that Mike was unholstering his gun. He unholstered his gun, looked at me and gave me the motion to unsnap that leather strap, which I did, and this thing huffed. And he turned to face the direction of where this thing was huffing from. And it then walked in the same direction it had walked for my son and I the night before, in the same direction it walked for the other gentleman the morning before. And it went down the hill. And again, it was just a few steps and it was out of there. I said, we needed to get out of there. And he agreed. And we walked in the direction of where the other two guys were, same elevation. We headed, I'm going to say, to the east or to the right, and walked over to them. And they had heard the tree knocks and they heard the walking because it had walked down the draw between where we were and where they were. And so we walked over there and we were debriefing on what was going on. And that's when the other gentleman who had already harvested his elk, who was there calling and looking for deer while we were looking for elk, he had said that when he had his encounter 24 hours earlier, that he had unholstered his gun and that this creature did that huff at him as well in disgust. And he said, the way that you described it is exactly how it happened to me. And so I'm thinking, wait a minute, you had all this information that you didn't share with us, and then you sent us into this area where all these things happen. As it turned out, he unholstered his gun and he ran down the mountain to get out of there. I don't know if he ran, but he got out of there quick because he said that it scared him, whatever it was. He didn't know what it was. So having grown up in the woods and hunting and listening to animals move, I just can't figure out what would have single footfalls and what would make that noise and do the knocks and knock back. And everything keeps coming back to Sasquatch for me, but I didn't lay eyes on it. I did contact a game warden about a month after this happened or more to report it, or several weeks later, to report the incident and provide the coordinates. And that particular game warden said they lived 5 miles from that location and would definitely go check it out. So I suggested that he didn't go alone. He would bring someone with, because I didn't see any tracks, but it just sounded like a big animal. It covered a lot of ground pretty quickly. So that is basically the first encounter of, whether it was an encounter or not, the pacing in 2000, and then these three accounts in the same exact area and the behavior that we encountered.
Can I ask a few questions before?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's absolutely incredible. So your cousin Mike is a big game hunter. I'm sure he's very familiar with the animals in that area. Are there any other animals that could make a huff sound like that? It sounded like he was ready with his gun for something.
He absolutely was ready with his gun. I didn't know that he unholstered his gun. When he told me to get ready, when he gave me that hand motion to unsnap the leather strap that was holding my gun in, that is when I realized he had unholstered his gun. And that is about the time when this creature did that disgusted huff. And that's when he then turned to face that direction. And we were both just looking as hard as we could to try and see what this was. And then it walked off and we couldn't see it. We could hear it walk off and we never saw it. But he is a very avid hunter. He's been hunting his whole life. He's been hunting those mountains his whole life. But he couldn't figure out what it is. I know it bothers him like it bothers me today thinking about it, in terms of neither one of us really want to see it or wanted to see it or have the encounter, but to see it then would have put to rest what was it. But I just don't know what else it could have been. The tree knock back, if you would say an elk would use if an elk took its rack and hit its rack on a tree, if they're going to rub their rack on a tree, they're going to rub it up and down on a tree. They're not going to hit it like the sound of a wooden bat hitting a telephone pole, just a real loud. You can imagine the sound. If you were to go outside and do that today, that's the sound. So
was that Mike's first potential Sasquatch interaction?
That's an interesting question, because he and I have had this conversation a few times. And if he thinks back on hunting in the mountains over the 40 years of hunting, it's a long time. And he said there's been times where roads that were passable would have a log drug over them, and they would be going in somewhere and then come back out and there's a log drug over the road where they had passed. The when people talk about hearing the screaming, that you can't figure out what it is that's screaming, like a woman screaming in the woods. And he knows all the animal sounds, the cats, the foxes, all these sounds. He knows them all well. And he had that experience once, but he, like me, never thought about Sasquatch ever until I started asking him questions after I had heard about the pacing situations. And then I thought about my experience in the Boundary Waters up in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, years ago. I then decided to ask him if he'd ever seen anything out of the ordinary, which then started him down the path of listening to some podcasts and doing his own armchair research, listening to podcasts, reading, etc. So
that's very interesting. Have you guys ever experienced something Ken mentioned was experiencing finding grizzlies, I believe, out there with their necks broken? Is that anything that you've ever run into out there?
No, I'm very thankful for that. My fear would be running into a grizzly, and he's actually run into grizzlies out there over the years when he's been out hunting, and he's never mentioned that he's run into that. Just looking back at that and knowing that there weren't many people around, we were probably there for, I think, 7 or 8 days. We might have seen 3 other hunters in different places around the mountains. That's a lot of country to hunt. And it just doesn't make sense to us as we think back on it that it could have been a prank by another hunter. Hunters just, when they're too busy hunting, to want to prank others in this way, right? Why would a hunter go to the exact same location and tree knock and huff? And how would they cover that distance of walking when a lot of unanswered questions? But yeah, that was the extent of.
Scene one had an actual visual and you were ready with both hands. Is that something you think about? What would have I done in that situation?
And I don't know what I would have done. I don't know what I would have done. I knew I had my hand on my gun. I knew he had his gun drawn. I just didn't know. I don't know. I don't want to see one. I didn't want to see one then. I don't want to see one now. I hope I never see one. If I do, it would be in a vehicle. It would be a long distance viewing, or somebody else having a really great sighting that gets recorded or something. But I don't ever want to see one. I hope I never do. I would tend to want to retreat just from what I'm hearing about the size of an adult from other sightings. I'd want to retreat and not risk taking a shot.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's an incredible story. Since the time that you've had that happen, have you heard of similar other interactions happening in the Tobacco Root Mountains?
I have not, and I've been searching for that. I searched the podcast just to see if anybody else is talking about that location, and I just haven't seen it. And I was looking because I'd be looking for validation of what happened, and I just haven't seen it. I'm fairly sure it wasn't a bear and there are grizzlies there, because a bear doesn't have thumbs to hold a piece of wood to hit it on a tree. And I think a bear would either come at you or go away. It wouldn't just tree knock and respond to a tree knock. And I suppose bears do den or hang out in spots, but I just wouldn't think 3 times in a row we would have the same activity in the same place, unless it was a spot, because this was the only fresh elk sign we had seen really in all the time there, because the elk were just in different locations than where we were, that it might have been, if it was a Sasquatch or a grizzly, it was a prime hunting spot for them where they could look down on the wallows.
Is that area a place that you would ever go hunting in again, or is that off limits for you now because of that?
That's a great question. I'm going to be going back out to Montana elk hunting with the bow again this year, and just haven't decided where we're going to go yet. I don't know that I'd want to go to that specific area, that specific draw where those wallows were, because that was, for me personally, terrifying. First, to have my son there, and of course, as a parent, you want to protect your kids. But then second, to have somebody who knows those mountains so well act the way he acted. I knew that this was something out of the ordinary. Yeah, I really don't want to go to that specific spot again, no.
I don't blame you. I really don't blame you. That if it would feel like I've dodged something a few times, I don't know if I want to put myself in that situation again. I don't know if what happens if lightning strikes again.
Right. Now, something interesting about this area is that cattle ranchers are allowed to let their cattle free range in this area. And there were cattle at lower elevations in this area. And so you think about the beef on a cow and versus elk meat. It's interesting that a cow would be very easy for a creature of this size and speed to catch, where an elk would be difficult to catch or more difficult to catch. So it's just interesting. My cousin and I were talking about the fact that the cows were plentiful, in that area. So that was also interesting.
Oh, absolutely. It's make it the best food source area that you could for a large animal that needs a ton of calories per day. Let's gift wrap some huge burgers that are walking around and have at it, boys. Right. That's phenomenal. Man, I'd love to talk to some of those ranchers. I bet they've had some come up missing for sure if they're free range. But that has been, it's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. All right, we've got Ian here with us today. Ian is from the state of Oregon. How's it going today, Ian?
It's going good. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Just hanging out on a nice Sunday. We just got a few inches of snow out here in Iowa, and I'm excited to hear. We were talking on Facebook, and you said you've got a few encounter/stories about Bigfoot from your time out there in Oregon. So I am definitely excited to hear those, and I'll let you get right into it.
Okay. Yeah, I live in Oregon, and I've been a hunter all my life. I've always hunted. And about, 15 years ago, probably, when I first started dating my wife, we were doing a lot of camping, and I was really into bear hunting at the time, spring bear hunting. So I would plan these camping trips around where we could camp and I could go hunt. And we were over on the McKenzie side of the McKenzie River area of Oregon. And we were camping, and I left the camp to go hunting. And it was spring bear hunt, really nice weather. And I knew a spot where there was lots of bear sign, and I kept trying to get in there and get one. And I was hiking down this road to get to this clearing, and it's way up in the mountains, high elevation. And I was trying to get to this clearing, and I stopped and I relieved myself, and I kept going until I got to the spot where I figured I'd see bears. And I didn't have any luck. On the way back, it was getting dusk, and I passed where I had went to the bathroom, and the wind shifted into my face, and I smelled the smell that I smelled was, I took it as a threat. It was not like, I got scared as soon as I felt it. It just killed me. I was like, oh my God, what is this? And it was close, whatever it was. I was walking down the road, and it turned to the left, and in front of me was just a wall of thicket of bushes and trees, and I couldn't see anything in it. And it smelled, I can say, death, wet dog. Oh, it's just awful. Just an awful smell. It was like, bam, in your face, like something just let it out like a skunk. But it was way worse than a skunk. And it freaked me out. I had no idea. I didn't even think of that it could be Bigfoot. I didn't know what it was. And I got back to the camp, and I was telling my wife about this story, and she said, oh, that was probably Bigfoot. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, it probably was. That was pretty much the first experience. And I didn't see anything. But that got me really thinking about Bigfoot. And I believe I reported it to BFRO, or I don't know what, or one of the Oregon Bigfoot sites. So that was the first experience. And so that same area was really good hunting. And we were going to come back that same year, me and some friends, to go deer hunting in the fall. So we were back in there about October. And it was when I was hunting previously, it was spring. I think it was about May. So we were back in October hunting deer, and we were real close to the spot that we were going to hike in and where I saw the bears. We were close to that spot, and we found a camp spot, and we got out of the car. We're checking it out, and we're like, well, let's go hunting, and then we'll set up camp. And it was morning. It was real early morning. So we just got out of the truck, and we heard up above us way up the hill. What I could describe as it was a whoop sound, but it was just loud. It was like so loud you could feel it in your, and I was like, oh my God, what that? And I was like, that has to be Sasquatch. And my friend that was with me, total skeptic, he wouldn't even entertain the idea that it could be Bigfoot. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, can you hear that? What is that? I don't know, but it can't be Bigfoot. So
that's interesting. Real quick. So like he didn't have an idea of what it could be, but he was like, no, definitely not Bigfoot. Not a chance.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild.
And I was asking him, I'm like, well, what is it? And it could be a person. I'm like, that's no person. You can feel it's so loud. You can feel the vibration. He just would not entertain the idea that it was a Bigfoot. Then the next day we went back to the same spot. Exact same thing happened. I should have recorded it. It didn't cross my mind. We weren't looking for Sasquatch. We were hunting. And exact same thing happened twice, 2 days in a row. It might've been 3. I can't remember, but we even drove up to where I hear the sound getting around. And it's just jungle over there. It's Oregon coastal jungle. It's so hard to hunt in. You can't see anything. You got to find like clear cuts and stuff. But yeah, so we heard him, and that got me really thinking about Sasquatch and researching it. And I started watching all the shows, and I'm like I was watching the Bigfoot, I don't know, that Bigfoot show, the Bobo and all those guys. And they were trying to make that whooping sound. And I was like, man, they're not getting it. I don't think it almost sounds like a gorilla or something. It's just so guttural and deep. Yeah. So that was the second experience. And that was, I'd say 15 years ago, probably. And then probably a few years after that, I was turkey hunting in the spring. This was a different area. It was along the same highway. It's a highway that goes up over the mountains and over on the west side of Oregon. So it was in the same spot, but off the same mountain, but it was probably 50, 60 miles from that spot. And so I was turkey hunting, and I had a new truck and a brand new trailer, like a $25,000 camping trailer. And I was just so excited to go out and use it. And so I went out there by myself, turkey hunting on Green Ridge. And it was nighttime when I got up there, and I was trying to find a spot to set up camp. And I set up I just pulled up, I had a good spot. I'm like, it was all along the road on the top. I'm like, there's nobody out here. I'm just going to camp here and run my generator and watch a movie and then go to sleep. So I was running the generator, watching my movie, laying in my bed, and it sounded like an elephant stomped on the ground outside of the trailer. Just everything shook, scared the hell out of me. I got up, I had a 45, I cocked it, I snuck outside, looked around, shut off the generator. I couldn't see nothing. I was freaked out. And I was like, okay, did I imagine that? What was that? I couldn't think of, I'm like, what happened? I couldn't figure it out. I turned the generator back on. I go back to lay down. I'm watching my movie, and I hear smack right behind my head. Something threw a big boulder at probably a basketball sized boulder at the back of my camp trailer, put a huge dent in it. I went out there with my 45, and I shut the generator off, and I ran to my cab, fired it up, and left. It was scary.
Wow. So
yeah,
that's nuts. So you immediately were like, I'm out of here. No questions asked. Something just threw a huge rock, dented my trailer. I'm out of here.
Oh yeah. It was terrible.
Have you ever gone back to that area?
I have. And we stopped hunting there because there were a lot of turkeys up there, and I don't happen to them. They all disappeared. They're not there anymore. They were planted up there by the Oregon Department of Fish and Game. They were there for a long time, and the turkeys, I don't know what happened to them. They got hunted out, or predators killed them or something. So we stopped going, and I haven't really been back up there for quite a while. We did go back up there and try hunting a couple times, but never had any more experiences like that. And I didn't see anything again. So I can't say it was Sasquatch or it was Bigfoot, but I don't know what else it could be.
What else is going to throw a huge rock and dent the side of your trailer and make the ground shake like an elephant because it did a huge stomp? Or it's just, there's only one thing that leads to that I can think of. I don't see a bear doing that, but
no. Yeah, and it was very threatening and scary. And I had my 45 pistol, but I didn't feel equipped.
Yeah, no.
I'm leaving.
I don't think you would. You probably made the right call. If something was aggressively trying to mess with your trailer, or at least get you out of there, who knows what the next step would have been.
Yeah.
Have you ever checked to see if there's other sighting reports in that area?
I haven't. I should, though. My first experience is there's quite a bit of sightings over on that side.
Really?
Over on the Mackenzie Pass, there's a lot of them, yeah. But I haven't checked on the Green Ridge area, but I will. I'll look at it. I'm curious now.
And I would assume you check in probably the BFRO website or Facebook groups, or?
Yeah, the only way I've looked is at the BFRO one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever been back to the Mackenzie Pass area?
Yeah, I've been back there a lot. I love that area. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's wild. Oh, man. Especially because in that first account, you were saying it happened 2 days in a row. That's just, even though it was 15 to 20 years ago.
Yeah, when he was whooping, making that noise, that was it might even been 3 days in a row. There was something there. It wasn't leaving. And I thought it was probably hunting the same deer we were hunting, was my guess. Maybe he was telling us to leave.
Let's say you're out hunting again. It sounds like you're a guy, you're hunting many different types of animals out there. You're all over the place. What would you do if you come around a corner and there's one right there? Like, this isn't a sound that's out in the corner, or this isn't a stone or a rock that's being thrown at you. Like, this is a face-to-face. Have you ever thought, what would I do in that situation if I'm out hunting and this happens?
I have, yeah. And I would just relish the moment, I think. I don't even think I would take a picture. I think I would just be like, wow, I got to see one. I've heard of guys saying they shoot one, but I wouldn't shoot one. They're smarter than we are, way smarter than we are. I'd love to just see one, though. It's on my bucket list.
You have any idea of what kind of creature they actually are out there? Is that something you thought about as well?
Yeah, man, they're like, I'm not sure. They're almost spiritual, like a spiritual creature. Everybody, all the skeptics are like, well, why can't you get a good picture? Why can't you get a picture? I think they do something to your camera. I think they do something to digital cameras. I honestly do. I've thought about taking like an analog camera, maybe old film camera or something, and see if that makes any difference. But I think they're smart. They can affect your digital devices somehow. Yeah. And I'm not sure what they are. I don't know if they may just be like another version of humans that are just so in touch with nature, so close to the earth that they can do stuff like camouflage themselves or mess with your camera because they understand whatever it is that's spiritual that we don't understand. Maybe, I don't know. I've thought about it. I think they're pretty amazing creatures, whatever they are.
Oh, no doubt. And the cool thing is that there's no wrong answers for it, no matter what anyone out there says. We can't prove that it's not an ape or not some type of humanoid or some portal jumping creature. We can't prove anything yet. Ian, this has been a very interesting story. And I have a feeling that if you keep going out in these areas in Oregon, you're going to run into something else again too. It sounds like the areas you're going are pretty remote areas. I'd say keep me up to date with if anything else happens, but it's
for sure
been fun chatting with you for a few minutes. And thank you for sharing what has happened to you so far.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thank you for the invite on here.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. All right, I'm going to use this space this week to announce that I'll be at the Sasquatch Summerfest in Oak Ridge, Oregon as an attender. I won't be presenting or anything, but I'll be hanging out, trying to interview people that have had Bigfoot encounters. If you're from the Oak Ridge, Oregon area or surrounding and you've had a Bigfoot experience, please contact me directly, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Also, Priscilla was nice enough that if you get your tickets through SasquatchSummerfest.com and use code Bigfoot Society, you can get 50% off the cost of your tickets, which is a big amount. So code Bigfoot Society to get 50% off your tickets, SasquatchSummerfest.com, and helps out the podcast as well. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. One more thing. Okay, here's the deal. So we're at the point, guys, where there's no stopping us. We are going to full-time podcast no matter what, but I need your help to get there. I figured it out, and we need approximately 700 more people in the Patreon in order to reach our goal of going full-time, actually able to go to places, people that have been having Bigfoot activity, interview them face-to-face, check it out for myself, all that good stuff. If you guys can, guys, this is the time. If you can at any time become a supporting member of the Bigfoot Society, go to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I would appreciate it. It's going to help us get to the next level, pretty much the final level. You guys are amazing for listening. If you can't become a supporting member, please share this episode everywhere you can. Share it with anyone who's into Bigfoot encounters, and that means a world to me as well. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
As of April 5th, the supporter level is 6 out of 700 or 0.85%.